welcome. Welcome to the meeting number 40 of the House of Commons Standing Committee of Industry and Technology. A reminder that if you are using your earpiece and it's plugged in but not in on your ear, please make sure that you place in front on the coaster to protect the health and well-being of our interpreters. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the adopted motion on September 22nd, 2025, the committee is resuming its study of opportunities, risks, and regulation of artificial intelligence in Canada's strategic industries. And today we'd like to welcome a number of guests. As an individual, Mr. Sean Mullen, Senior Fellow at Monk's School of Global Affairs and Public Policy of University of Toronto. Welcome, Mr. Mullen. Of the Society of Composers, Authors, Music Publishers of Canada, Ms. Jennifer Brown, Chief Executive Officer, welcome. And of Urban Logic, Mr. Michael Lee, Chief Strategy Officer. Welcome to the Industry Committee. As you know, we will have up to 5 minutes. You will have up to 5 minutes each for your opening rounds, in which we will proceed with questions. So, Mr. Mullen, we'll turn it over to you for 5 minutes. Take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the invitation to appear today. My name is Sean Mullen. I'm a Senior Fellow at the Monk's School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, where I co-lead the AI Competitiveness Project with my colleague and co-author, Jackson Kahn. Together, we recently released a report entitled Sovereign by Design, Strategic Options for Canadian AI Sovereignty. A briefing note on this report has been submitted to members today. The question before this committee sits at the center of a difficult and strategic tension. Canada is a small, open economy and a middle power. Our prosperity and security depend on deep integration with global partners, in particular the United States. To date, that openness has largely been a source of strength, but with AI, integration also creates dependencies on foreign cloud infrastructure, advanced chips, foundation models, and digital platforms. And in this period of geopolitical rupture, those dependencies become riskier and can jeopardize Canadian sovereignty by creating channels for foreign leverage or coercion. At the same time, failing to adopt AI is also a sovereignty risk. A country that falls behind in AI adoption will become less productive, less competitive, and more vulnerable. Therefore, the challenge is not to choose between adoption and sovereignty. It is to capture the benefits of AI while protecting Canadian data, jurisdiction, institutional capacity, and economic autonomy. Our report's central argument is that the goal of sovereign AI policy should be freedom from coercion, not isolation. For Canada, AI sovereignty cannot mean building an entirely domestic AI stack. No middle power can do that at frontier scale. But unmanaged dependency is also risky. It can leave Canada exposed to decisions made by foreign governments, foreign courts, or foreign technology firms. The policy objective, therefore, should be to structure Canada's dependencies in ways that preserve choice, reduce leverage, and maintain the ability to act in the public interest. Viewed through this lens, AI sovereignty can be considered a spectrum, not a binary. Every step that reduces Canadian exposure to coercion or expands Canada's room to maneuver strengthens our sovereignty. This matters because it makes the policy challenge tractable. Canada does not need to solve every problem at once to make meaningful progress. To identify where intervention matters most, our report maps the 7 layers of the AI technology stack, from data to compute to the application layer, and assesses them against 5 dimensions of digital sovereignty: jurisdictional, operational, technological, societal, and economic. The result is a vulnerability heat map that helps policymakers see where the most serious risks are concentrated and sets priorities accordingly. A key finding is that cloud infrastructure is Canada's most acute controllable vulnerability, and in our assessment, the highest priority area for federal action. Cloud is where policies like procurement reform, standards, Canadian ownership models, encryption controls, audit rights, and pooled public sector demand can make a real difference. Overall, we set out more than 24 specific policy options across every layer of the stack. Our report does not present a single blueprint. Rather, it presents a menu of strategic options that can be pursued at different speeds and in different combinations by different actors. Canada's window for action also matters. As models continue to improve and AI adoption spreads across the economy, the infrastructure build-out over the next 5 to 10 years will dwarf today's capacity. Decisions made now about infrastructure, platforms, procurement, and standards will harden into long-term commitments. A final point is that interdependence with peer countries is not the same as dependency on a dominant power. Partnerships with like-minded middle powers can help Canada reduce vulnerability while maintaining shared access to advanced capabilities. Canada has a meaningful strengths to build on: excellent researchers, abundant energy, a vibrant domestic tech sector, emerging sovereign infrastructure providers, and democratic institutions worth protecting. We believe that AI sovereignty is achievable for Canada, but it will require deliberate choices. The window for making these choices is now. Thank you, and I'd be pleased to elaborate on any specific recommendations in follow-up. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Over to you, Ms. Brown.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Brown, and I am the CEO of SOCAN. SOCAN represents songwriters, composers, and music publishers. We collect license fees for the public performance of virtually all musical works in Canada and for the reproduction of music. In turn, we distribute royalties to more than 200,000 members and to millions of rights holders we represent through agreements with international societies. In 2025, SOCAN collected $587 million in license fees. And culture is an economic driver, contributing to $65 billion to the Canadian economy in 2024. And Canada is the third largest exporter of music in the world after the United Kingdom and the United States. There is an opportunity for Canadian music to continue to thrive alongside AI. However, most AI companies are not paying for music. Instead, songwriters, composers, and music publishers are currently powering advances in AI models without sharing in the economic benefits. Even worse, the resulting AI models can output vast numbers of complete songs in response to single prompts, and that AI-generated music can potentially replace the work of Canadian creators in the marketplace. Major digital music services like Apple and Deezer report that more than 1/3 of the music uploaded to their services these days is fully AI-generated. That means they're being flooded with millions of AI-generated tracks every month. That poses an existential threat for our members, and a global study conducted in late 2024 estimates that under the current conditions, up to 24% of music creators' revenue are at risk of disappearing because of AI by 2028. The possibility of any Canadian industry losing up to a quarter of its revenues in the next 2 years should cause national alarm. However, that dire prediction is based on current market conditions. We have the opportunity to change those conditions right now. The use of high-quality, human-created music has been called essential to developing AI models, and we can recognize that value through fair compensation to creators and the companies that invest in them. We must focus on an approach that not only values human authorship, but also grows the economic impact of Canada's cultural industries, rather than shrink them. Making clear the rejection of a text and data mining, or TDM, exception and establishing effective transparency obligations on training and outputs are essential conditions for the emergence of a functional licensing market. So let me explain. First, Canada needs to take a strong stance again against text and data mining exception. AI companies are advocating for broad exception that would permit them to exploit copyright-protected works. The narrative that innovation and copyright cannot coexist is simply untrue. What is true is that stealing is not innovation. Earlier this year, SOCAN launched a nationwide letter writing campaign against a TDM exception, obtaining support from almost 9,000 concerned Canadians and demonstrating consensus that the government must not legitimize the theft of creative works. Internationally, both the Australian and the UK governments have publicly decided against implementing a TDM exception, and Canada must take a similar approach and affirm that no new or modified copyright exceptions for text and data mining will be considered. Second, Canada must establish effective transparency obligations on training and outputs. AI companies have simply helped themselves to music, scraping the internet to train their systems. They must be required to disclose which copyright-protected works have been ingested and stored in their training datasets. It's also vital for AI companies to ensure that their outputs of their systems are labeled as AI generated, clearly distinguishing them from the works of human creators. The labeling of AI outputs will allow the public to make informed choices about the type of music that they consume. SOCAN has been licensing new technologies for over 100 years. This is what we do. Every year, SOCAN licenses billions of individual uses of music by tens of thousands of businesses in Canada, and we collect more than $500 million in royalties and distribute that money globally to millions of songwriters, composers, and music publishers. The challenges presented by AI are not unique. SOCAN is committed to making sure that music creators share in the value created both from the training of the AI systems and from the musical output they generate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. We'll go over to Mr. Lee for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear. My name is Michael Lee. I am the Chief Strategy Officer of Urban Logic. Urban Logic is a Canadian company headquartered in Vancouver with Canadian ownership. We have deployed operational AI decision systems in municipalities, provincial and state ministries, emergency management agencies, and transportation and transit agencies across North America. I appear before this committee to share what a decade of operational deployments for governments by Urban Logic has taught us about the conditions under which AI generally improves government decisions and outcomes. This committee has devoted significant time to the risks of frontier AI with autonomous agents. That scrutiny is certainly warranted, but it risks creating a second, quieter gap. That is, treating all AI as equivalent and allowing legitimate concern about frontier systems to crowd out investment in the responsible use of AI that is already delivering measurable public benefit. This use is machine and deep learning on structured data sets with crash records, traffic counts, land use records, emergency incident histories, for example, in order to surface analysis for human decision makers who retain full authority over every consequential action. Three things are true in every deployment by Urban Logic of solutions for government agencies. First, the most valuable work is integrating data governments already hold, not building AI models. The first question in any AI procurement should not be, what will it predict? But instead, what will it take to get our data ready? Second, successful deployments are those where staff can trace an insight to its inputs and officials can defend a decision in a public meeting. Where deployments have stalled, the cause has rarely been the AI. More often, the government was not positioned to act, or citizens held fears that did not reflect what the system was doing. An audit trail is the mechanism through which AI becomes publicly sustainable and accountable. Third, every deployment demonstrated augmentation and results. For example, in BC, land use review across federal, provincial, Indigenous, and municipal jurisdictions on one auditable platform compresses timelines from months to minutes. In Edmonton, planners move from static reports to dynamic scenario analysis. In San Jose, infrastructure investments are evaluated across traffic, equity, emissions, and economic access before decisions are made, replacing months of consultant studies in minutes. In Minnesota, machine learning on incident data, building characteristics, weather, and demographics shifts the fire department from reactive response to predictive action. These outcomes are not incidental. Decisions about land use, emergency response, and infrastructure investments are the decisions that define whether communities trust their governments. Accountability with a documented, traceable record is what makes them defensible. These tools change what is possible. Our recommendations to this committee reflect what field experience has demonstrated is necessary to enable responsible, effective AI adoption in government. Let me highlight four. 1. Invest in data integration before AI model investment. 2. Mandatory auditability standards with immutable audit trails, model output lineage, and explainability requirements should be procurement criteria. 3. Require workforce plans with phased rollouts as a condition of government AI contracts. And 4. mandate structural AI governance, including risk-calibrated controls, as a condition of government AI contracts. The evidence is already in the field. A fire chief acting on risk data before a fire happens. A planner evaluating a decade of infrastructure decisions in an afternoon. A land administrator assessing approvals across jurisdictions in minutes rather than months. That is not what AI might do. It is what responsible AI is doing right now. We ask this committee to give equal attention to the costs of moving too slowly. The compliance framework that allows Canada to move confidently with AI that is proven, governed, and ready, while maintaining appropriate caution around systems that are not, is what Canada needs. That distinction is the most important one this committee can draw. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. We'll now open to the floor to questions. We'll start with Mr. Falk for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for coming to committee today and providing your testimony. It's, I'm sure, going to be a very interesting hour that we get to spend with you. Mr. Mullen, I would like to begin with you. You mentioned the word sovereignty several times in your presentation. You've talked about that in some of your writings. Can you explain a little further, what do you mean by sovereignty?
Happy to, and thank you for the question. This was a key issue that we grappled with when my colleague and I set out to write this paper. Sovereignty is a very general concept. It has many different meanings in different contexts. And so for the purposes of AI, we ended up looking through the literature on digital sovereignty and essentially landed on this kind of what we consider a workable definition for this space, which is what we want to achieve by sovereignty here in Canada, at least our advice, is this freedom from coercion, freedom from being able to, a foreign power, a foreign country, to use vulnerabilities or dependencies in our AI technological stack against Canada. We admit that's a little bit different than maybe the more formal binary way of thinking about sovereignty under international law. And when we applied our lens of where these sovereign vulnerabilities are, we took 5 different dimensions, essentially, of that we applied through the lens. And that is technological sovereignty, economic sovereignty, operational sovereignty, societal sovereignty, and jurisdictional sovereignty. And these are all, I'm happy to elaborate more on each one of those 5, but they're all different lenses where we think that Canada could be vulnerable, indeed any country could be vulnerable, and we use those tests to essentially develop our recommendations in the report.
Those, would those be the layers that you talk about?
Well,
or is that something different yet?
So what we did was there's kind of the layers of the tech stack, which are things from like data to physical hardware to chips to cloud compute to kind of foundation AI models, right down to kind of the application layer. That would be the layers. And then kind of the second dimension of our analysis was these kind of 5 dimensions of sovereignty. And so you end up with, there's a heat map in our report. It's got kind of 7 by 5 different boxes, and that's kind of where we look to see where Canada's most vulnerable areas are and which areas are less vulnerable.
You talked about data centers or cloud storing. How critical is it that Canada has its own data centers?
We think this is very important, but our advice is to approach that in kind of a tiered way. So it doesn't mean that every type of compute in Canada needs to be on a sovereign data center, but what we think should be done is an approach. We recommend different kind of tiers of sensitivity in terms of the operations. So national security would be at the top. The second would be kind of sensitive or personal data. And the third would be more general business data. And we have different recommendations. We think the most secure, the most sovereign should be at the kind of top of that pyramid, where any type of interruption of, say, national security or critical government services could be used to compromise Canada. That's where sovereignty matters the most. And then as you go down, our recommendation, say, for the general business community is we should let market conditions dictate how sovereign, a particular company should want. There are companies.
I need to.
Yeah,
I'd
sorry.
like to ask
go
a
ahead.
few more questions, so if I can cut you off at that point, you may have opportunity to expand yet. Ms. Brown, I'd also like to ask you some questions. I've thought a lot about that whole music industry and the space that you're operating in, and it's interesting because some time ago somebody showed me a song that they had developed by giving it certain parameters and certain genres, and it's actually quite amazing what AI can do. How do we restrict AI from accessing copyrighted, protected material? Is that even possible?
I keep turning it off. Sorry. Thank you for the question. I think that question, unfortunately, we didn't get the opportunity to ask it, quite honestly, because the AI companies just took the copyrighted materials. They did not ask for permission. They did not seek any consent from any body. They just used it for their training materials. So now we're doing a bit of the catch-up. And I would say that, for the most part, the creators themselves, they're not afraid of tech. They are innovators themselves. They are also, they want to use AI as a tool. But they also want the basic respect of, you took my work, my life's work, you used it to train your model, and now you're using it to output things for financial benefit, and I'm not sharing in that. So unfortunately...
But AI is so good and so sophisticated. How do you know when they've actually pirated somebody's material?
That is another good question. That's why I'm asking for transparency. Not only did they steal something, they didn't tell us what they took, and the labeling on the output. Now, we are actively looking at that. There are things where you can see a substantial copy in the output. We know that the works are in there. But there are different things. We believe with transparency of what went in and labeling of what went out, there could be a chance to also look at attribution of what comes out of the platform.
So do you think AI models should have restrictions put on them as to where they access their data?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I think I'm out of time.
Thank you very much. We're going to go over to Mr. Ma for 6 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, witnesses, to be here today. My first question is for Mr. Mullin. You noted the employment effects remain uncertain, but will likely be consequential in terms of worker displacement. I've worked in the technology industry for over 30 years, and often the case that new roles emerge to complement emerging technologies once they are mature. Will AI follow similar models of impact on the workforce as previous tech revolutions, or is this time different?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I mean, this is the million-dollar question out there in terms of broader impact on the economy. What I have known from looking at kind of the most recent emerging literature in this space, there's quite a bit of economists doing work on this, is we've only started to see very little bit of an impact on labor markets across, at least in the North American context. There's some little evidence right now that it's entry-level workers that are potentially the ones being most impacted. This was a study that came out of Stanford last year looking at the U.S. economy. But I think to look at your broader question, I think to look at previous, historical trends of technology, I think what always gets underestimated is what gets created by this new technology, right? And I do think I'm more of an optimist at heart when it comes to the capacity of humans to invent new demands, new ideas from technology. So I do think in the long run we will find ways to employ everyone to make sure that this technology is being utilized. But I do think we need to be very careful about that transition, and particularly people and individuals who might be disrupted by it happening too fast.
Yeah. Certainly, in my early days in the career, they talked about going paperless society, but here we are. Similar question to Mr. Lee. You've mentioned AI has already achieved benefits. Do you believe AI is expanding productivity and capacity?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question to the member. Yes. What we see with government agencies, and I'm also mindful to the workforce transition because that is something that is disruptive, certainly for new technology adoption. But to the extent that it's done responsibly, the Government of Canada, for example, has significant data pools and sources. And a lot of that is not on the internet. It is the government's data. To the extent that we're able to organize that data in better ways, to make it more useful, to break down the data silos between government departments, so that when you're planning infrastructure, addressing Indigenous communities' concerns, environmental permitting type considerations, that data should be combined. That will provide government decision makers at all levels a better opportunity to make the evaluation faster, not rely on large consultant reports, put the tools in the hands of the civil service. This takes a transition, certainly, and can be done responsibly through testing and validation. And that will make people in government able to use these tools in a way that meets the complex challenges of climate change, the complex challenges of geopolitical challenges in terms of getting projects built faster, but also serving vulnerable communities. I think that in our discussions with government ministries, even here in Ottawa for the last number of months, we see many opportunities where this can make a difference.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I'm going back to Mr. Mullin. So in March 2026, you co-wrote a report entitled Sovereign by Design, Strategic Options for Canadian AI Sovereignty, alongside your colleagues at the Munk School of Public Policy, Jackson Khan. In the report, you argue in favor of the importance of AI sovereignty, especially in the context of the changing world order and trade threats by the United States. So what do you see as some of the largest vulnerability if Canada does not act now in regards to digital and AI sovereignty?
Thank you. I think some of the major findings of the report are, in terms of this particular layers of the technology stack, are, as I've talked about, the cloud services side is very, very vulnerable. We're also quite vulnerable on chip supply. Almost all of the advanced chips are not manufactured here in Canada. And there's a number of other kind of medium-level exposures. But I think the overall notion that we wanted to get across is, you know, these decisions about this infrastructure build-out and these technologies are getting made right now. And it's kind of a historical build-out in the United States and across the world. And the risk is that we lock into a technology that we don't control. And that, if you see what's going on right now, you know, we have an ally who is looking for ways to use vulnerabilities to exploit us for other reasons. Being more exposed and more vulnerable to what may arguably be the most important tech stack in the world seems to be something we don't want to expose Canada to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie, pour 6 minutes.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. D'abord, merci aux trois.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you, witnesses, for your presence and for your rich presentations. We've learned a lot. My question is for Ms. Brown from SOCAN. But before that, Madam Chair, allow me to extend greetings to colleagues joining us like Mr. McKinnon. And I'm delighted to see you chairing the meeting today. So thank you for that. Ms. Brown, SOCAN, as you reminded us, plays a very important role on behalf of artists throughout the country. Let me come back to what you explained, maybe through request for the coalition of diversity of cultural groups, which works towards preparing a framework for generative AI, and they made 5 requests that fall in line with what you said. They are asking to guarantee that rights will not allow data mining or exceptions that will allow or prevent companies from using the works of artists using generative AI without any compensation. And that is what you told us. I think you also gave examples of Australia and the UK, if I understand you well. Could you please explain that and reassure us that you confirm that you're in agreement with this request?
I do confirm that, and we are greatly aligned with the CDCE, of course, and as a member organization there. They're doing great work. There has been lobbying of the AI tech companies around the world, really asking for this exception in copyright acts around the world. So what has happened so far is in Australia and in the UK, the governments have put out there and saying, there will not be an exception. We're not going to contemplate a copyright exception for the copying of all these works that has taken place for the training of the AI data sets. So that's important for us because we feel like now the AI companies, they don't have that loophole that they're trying to get, right? And that means they can come to the table and we can talk about licensing and compensation for those works.
OK, merci beaucoup. Parce que
Thank you very much. If I understand you well, right now, generative AI companies are mining this information and stealing information. Now, the framework and law will say that if that is done, there will be compensation required. Am I correct?
Yes, the current Copyright Act would not allow for that exception. It would say that, you know, there are incentives for human creation. That should take place even with AI. It takes place with every other technology, every other broadcaster. People are paid when their works are used.
OK, merci.
Thank you. Some generative AI companies have publicly stated that if there's no exception, if they can't mine data that way, they will no longer be able to produce content. What arguments do you have for them?
I have the argument that we've heard this so many times before. This is exactly what Spotify said in the early days. This is what radio said for years, right? But we've always been able to work hand in hand for them to grow and for them to be compensating the creators when they use that content in their growth as well. So I don't think that copyright has ever stifled innovation. This is something that works hand in hand, and I just have to, I can't take that argument seriously because we've heard it too many times before and it's been disproven every time.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. À ce sujet,
Thank you very much. Joshua Benchiu, an expert, told us that companies will want clear guidelines in line with what you've just said. And the coalition made another request in line with what you said. The obligation for generative AI companies should publish what they use. What I understand is that is not the case right now. Is it technically possible? Are there some countries that have implemented that so far?
I believe it's technically possible. Every other company or every other country is also requesting these transparency guidelines so that they know what has been used. The EU is currently on the second round of these transparency obligations because they're improving them to be more detailed. So yes, I see no reason why this is not technologically possible to produce.
OK, puis il me reste un peu moins d'1 minute.
I have less than a minute left. The coalition has made another request, which you mentioned, adopting legislative provisions, helping to identify content that is generated purely with AI. I think that has started, but that's not fully the case. Once again, do we have international examples?
I have examples from actually digital service providers that are actually seeking this as well. Like Apple has said, I want to be able to show their users that this song is generative AI. So there are companies that are out there saying, and can be used as a third-party source, so we know it can be done. The issue is we shouldn't all have to pay for third-party sources for this labeling. They themselves know what's been labeled or what is generative AI. They should be putting that stamp, that label on it when it is outputted so everybody knows.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. We'll go over to Ms. Borelli for 5 minutes, please.
Ms. Brown, my questions might be a little bit repetitive, but I find this extremely interesting because I have 2 nephews who are budding creators, and I'm concerned for their well-being as well. Should creators be able to opt out of having their work used for AI training? Should the Copyright Act make it clear that AI training requires an opt-in license rather than an opt-out system?
So opt-out and opt-in has definitely been talked about in other jurisdictions. In most cases, I would say that creators really don't favor an opt-out. That's putting the onus on the creator when they haven't even been told that their work has been used, that now they're supposed to go through and say, oh yes, my work has been used, and now I'm going to put through some sort of request to take that out. There should have been the permission being asked going in. And I think that's important for creators in the future, is that they have agency over when their works are being used.
So is an opt-out system unfair once a model has been trained?
I don't think it's the most ideal system, and it has been rejected in other territories.
Okay, so some groups have, creator groups have argued that copyright protection should remain tied to human creativity and that fully AI-generated works should not receive copyright protection because machines cannot exercise human skill and judgment. To play devil's advocate on this scenario, do you think it would be unfair for people who train and work with AI to develop music? And how should we then clarify in the Copyright Act that copyright only protects works created by human authors and not works generated by AI?
I think the stance of most creators and creator groups would say that the Copyright Act already states that it's a human ability, that you have to have skill and judgment for a song to be put in, like for copyright to exist, and that skill and judgment is a human action. It's not a machine. So yes, there is definitely the idea that generative AI is not falling within copyright. However, we still, as we spoke earlier, have the issue that human-created works are in that output. That output is not the brainchild of a machine. It is derivative of other human creation. So we would like to see the compensation flow throughout input to output.
So would granting copyright protection to fully AI-generated works risk flooding the market with machine-made content?
I think it's a very big question. I would like to take more time to think about that one, because it's who's the owner of that copyright? Are you putting that as the owner, as the AI company, as the person who prompted it? I mean, again, we believe that the output there is still pieces of human-created works.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Borelli. We'll go over to Ms. Bigham for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentations. I have so many questions, but I'm going to share my time with MP Ntumba as well, because he's got some questions as well. One of the things we've been hearing quite a bit just recently because of the news from the U.S. Regarding the way, from air cooling to liquid, and the way that AIs or data centers are cooled, and the use of water. And I wanted to, and Mr. Mullen, I wanted to go to you and ask, I believe that in Canada we have better standards in place, and if there were, are there concerns that you find, and what would you recommend, and what kind of, and of course there are differences in terms of evaporative and then the direct cooling method. I know in my riding, we're just seeing that happen as well, and people have complained about, what that may look like because of the unknown. It could be water pressure, it could be water contamination. So I wanted to understand, if you could speak a little bit about that, and are there concerns, and what can we do to address that from the get-go?
Sure, thank you. Excuse me. It wasn't, we didn't go directly into the environmental considerations in our report, but it was something we're certainly alive to as we look at this topic. I think one of the benefits, as you kind of hinted at, of having sovereign AI capacity or even having, if it's not fully sovereign, but having hyperscaler data centers here in Canada to serve Canadian compute demand, is that, as you said, they'll be subject to Canadian environmental laws and our kind of standards. And I do think that is, if you're taken for given that there's going to be a build out of demand as more and more Canadians adopt this technology, then you want to make sure that compute, as you trace it all the way back to the energy and the environmental impacts, are as mitigated as possible. And not only water, but some of Canada's clean or renewable energy capacity as well is where we could really benefit from building out this compute in a way that makes sense for Canada and Canadians.
Thank you very much. And I'll quickly ask Ms. Brown. One of the things, and I think MP Falk actually talked about this as well. There's a famous example in terms of in South Asia of a song just I think a year or two ago where a movie song was then reintroduced as one of the legendary singers from the past. And this is somebody who's no longer with us, and it broke people's heart to kind of, because they almost thought that this was an old song somebody missed, and it became, it had millions of views, obviously monetized, and to me that there's something so wrong as well, and it was almost nostalgic as well. Where would you find that balance of, that respect, that dignified way of doing something where the right people are benefiting as well, and how can we do that?
I think it's exactly what you said. It's looking for the respect. We work on the composition side, so the songwriting, the creative side. But this also impacts the artists. I can't really speak to the artists that you're speaking to, but there's definitely requests about name and likeness, and that goes beyond music. That's personal, that's privacy, right? Making sure that words being put in your mouth by an AI or things that you would say, or a song being sung by somebody is something that they would want their voice towards. So I think the principles remain true for all artistic elements, is consent at the beginning to make sure that, yes, this is, I'm giving over the ability for this to be generated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Molin, j'ai une question pour vous. Dans quel secteur?
Mr. Merlin, I have a question for you. In which sector do we have AI being used by companies a lot? Is it health, advanced manufacturing, public administration? Where do we see strong possibilities for leadership by Canada?
Okay, thank you for the question. Are you talking about potential for AI? Yeah, okay.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we're out of time. Perhaps the next round we can get it, but it's always a 5-minute time slot. Okay, thank you very much. We'll go over to Mr. Saint-Marie for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Still for Ms. Brown, we learned that the Prime Minister announced that the AI strategy will be published or announced next week. Do you have the impression that the cultural sector was sufficiently included in discussions that intend to establish the strategy so far?
We did. The cultural industry was part of heritage and those conversations. I'm not sure exactly how much the cultural industry had input into this overall strategy. There were a couple of meetings, but I'm not sure. We will see, I guess, in the output of the strategy where the messaging landed.
Okay, oui, nous aussi, on reçoit le ministre Solomon.
We will be receiving Minister Solomon next week at this committee. If the strategy were announced, we would like to question him. Could you explain to us what is being requested when it comes to the additional protocol to the 2025 framework for digital as requested by the group interested in this?
Really where we've been at is the exact same request. I think all of creative industries have asked, please do not create an exception and please put transparency first and foremost. We're using transparency as the first principle right now because we need to know what's been used so that we can act.
OK, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I have lots of questions, but we don't have enough time. I have 40 seconds left, so I'll give Mr. Mullen the possibility of answering the question asked by my colleague, Mr. Tumba.
Excuse me, quickly. One of the areas where I think there's a tremendous amount of potential for applying AI in Canada, we tend to think of this in a sector basis. I think there's lots of opportunity in things like healthcare, in our energy sector, and financial services. But I also think there's this way of thinking about it. The latest round of large language models have the potential to impact kind of knowledge work as a horizontal consideration. And that, I think that's a tremendous way of thinking about how to improve the productivity of a huge swath of the Canadian workforce. And that could include, obviously, the government and public sector workers as well.
Oh, merci beaucoup. Vous avez 10.
Thank you. You have 10 seconds left, but thank you.
Back to Mr. Falk for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mullen, getting back to you, do you think that AI models should have restrictions placed on them?
I do think that, so there's an emerging debate as to how much we should regulate AI models. I do think that the completely unbounded, unrestricted approach is not responsible. I do think we should be careful about stifling innovation in terms of how to put these restrictions on. But particularly when we're talking about frontier models, we've heard in the news about things like Mythos. These are extraordinary capabilities, and to have absolutely no restrictions or no type of regulation whatsoever, I think would be irresponsible.
So what types of restrictions or regulations would you suggest?
I would say that you'd want to have a balance between the ability to innovate and the ability to ensure that some of the most egregious harms that could come from these models are mitigated. And that would be in areas like national security, in areas like personal privacy, in areas like catastrophic risk. There's many other experts out there who are much more familiar with the kind of existential risk or catastrophic risk aspect of these AI models.
You also mentioned in your comments that we've had a good relationship working with our friends to the south, but you also talked about friendly allies potentially coercing us. Can you square that hole for me a little bit? What do you mean by all that?
I just refer to what's kind of been happening in the past 18 months with the administration of President Trump, where many of the policies and actions taken by that government is trying to secure leverage against Canada. Things like using the fentanyl tariffs as a way to extract leverage, and so.
You specifically, though, connected the dots to AI, where we've seen coercion there?
Well, I haven't. Our paper doesn't say that there's actual evidence in the AI space. The point is, if you increase your dependency on the United States and on U.S. tech companies, does that increase the risk that that's a lever that gets used against us in the future? If you're running a data center, national security level service, and the president says, shut that off as part of a acrimonious trade deal or negotiation, that's something I don't think Canada should put itself into that position. So avoiding the ability to be coerced is the point of our recommendations.
Okay, and your suggestion for avoiding that would be what?
Well, what we've done is we've essentially went through all the kind of layers of the stack and the AI stack and found different vulnerabilities. And our kind of point is, look, anything you do, any one of these different vulnerabilities, some of them are worse than others, but you don't have to kind of solve them all at the same time. You can just work away at mitigating our exposure. So on cloud, for example, building sovereign compute for the most highly sensitive national security is one way of making sure we don't get exposed to that type of vulnerability.
During COVID, it was reported that our own Canadian military had launched propaganda campaigns against Canadian citizens with the use of AI. Is that something that we believe, or that you would believe, sir, that the government needs to put restrictions on and parameters?
I mean, I think that's something that would go beyond just the use of AI, and it would not be something that, if that indeed happened, that we'd want the military or the government doing in any case. So I would say that's not just an AI issue.
Those are the types of issues, like these deep fakes and things that AI can do, the replications that AI can do, are just fascinating and incredible. And should there not be safeguards that would prevent government from using them against their own citizens to promote any particular ideology?
Yes, I think when you get into particular instances of propaganda like deep fakes, that's where you'd want to say, well, what is the law in Canada that should apply to Canadians, that should apply to citizens, that should apply to anybody, in the sense that we have a way of avoiding misuse of that type of technology to do things like misleading citizens through deep fakes.
Some types of regulations.
Indeed.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll go over to Mr. Baines for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for joining us today, to all of our guests. My first question is going to go to British Columbia, of course. I'd like to have my first question directed towards Mr. Lee. We see how the world's becoming quite complicated. Significant uncertainties, putting strain on public safety and institutions, not just in Canada, but globally. How can AI support government's identity? How can government identify the risks before they escalate and direct resources where they matter the most? And I ask you this because I know Urban Logic does a lot of work in different jurisdictions, so maybe you can provide some input from there.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, to the member from Richmond for that question. I have seen with Urban Logic's deployments, the dynamic models that we put forward enable the addressing of geohazard risk, for example. In the city of Edmonton, as I mentioned in my opening statement, what we have done is provide a dynamic scenario modeling device and platform for city planners to determine, with climate change and the impact out to 2040 and beyond, where the wildfire risks would be, to ensure that when you're building in a built environment where you should build housing. We recognize from the lessons of Lytton, Kelowna, Hinton, Jasper, many of the wildfire damage to public safety and housing, that government has the data in order to map out and utilize that data in a more predictive, proactive form. And that is not relying on static reports. We know with hazardous risk and vulnerability assessments, LCAPs, local climate adaptation plans, these are examples of government-required reports that need to be done at the municipal level. We also know that in terms of national integrated emergency management type systems, we need to integrate the various jurisdictions, federal, provincial, First Nations, and local, in an emergency type situation. These are examples of where we can better plan, understand where evacuation routes might be, recognize where traffic congestion, critical infrastructure demands on wildfires, flooding, earthquakes. These are public safety risks. And so I would say, and I'd like to also say to Mr. Mullen's comments to this committee as well, among many that he stated, that the Government of Canada clearly needs to be using these tools. In order to properly regulate the responsible use of AI, government itself needs to be utilizing the tools and adopting and adapting in a responsible way. There are federal directives around algorithmic impact assessments to the public service in order to use this. So there are definite regulatory requirements already established. We can do more, though.
Thank you for that. And I'm just going to build on a little bit. You worked with the city of Coquitlam in British Columbia on a 2-year trial and to apply or advance analytics and create real world benefits. Can you outline some of the outcomes from that partnership?
The city of Coquitlam, like city of Burnaby and Richmond, Surrey, Nanaimo, are various municipalities in British Columbia that we work with. In that case, it was a pilot to look at community amenities. When you have a growing community, where do you best place, as a decision maker, mayor and council, city planners, your resources to ensure that there are park, school, traffic, housing, childcare amenities for your community? And so that's an example of the kind of planning device when you're integrating the data in a planning way to understand where population growth is and what the needs are of the community. This is the kind of decision-making support system that we've done for the city of San Jose, where you can model out different community infrastructure amenity investments and recognize what makes for, in a key performance indicator kind of way, a great community and a healthy one.
And I'll just stay with you there. Now, a lot of the questions we get around AI, of course, is the privacy, the protections that people want protection of their data. What processes do you, Urban Logic, what do you utilize to protect data? And ultimately, the committee, our role is to try to get recommendations put forward. So do you have recommendations for the government on
A very brief
protecting
response,
data?
please.
Very quickly.
Thank you.
Relate to Canadian sovereignty, Madam Chair, is the ability, we are a purpose-built solutions for government with the highest, strictest privacy standards. But that means auditability standards, ensuring that we're tracking lineage of where the data source goes, access controls to the data, encryption, as well as ensuring that data itself is kept with zero retention. These are examples of the kind of mechanisms that can build out responsible use of AI.
Thank you very much. And we just have
Thank
about
you.
2.5 minutes of the committee time remaining. It's not quite enough to equally distribute it between all parties, but if you'll allow me, colleagues, to use the chair's prerogative, I just want to ask one brief question of Ms. Brown, just so that I can fully understand what you're saying. But in brief, all the Canadian content from all of our artistic creators and others is being used, in essence, for free by AI models. Is that correct? They use your content to train, and there's no compensation or recognition or transparency how that's being done. Is that
That's
accurate?
correct. Yes.
Okay, and you're saying there's some other jurisdictions that require that transparency, that they're using your content and then to compensate you because of licensing fees. Is that correct?
Well, what I'm saying is that with the transparency and no exception, we believe we can have a market solution to license these AI platforms to make sure that compensation is flowing to the creators. These are the same arguments that are happening in other countries, because AI platforms did this in every other country. And we're able to, with our relationships with those other societies in those countries, can share that information with this committee if you would like to see what's happening in other jurisdictions.
Yes, I do feel that you're the voice that you brought to the table as one of the few in this space. So any further submissions you can provide to us and the analysts for further review would be welcome. I think this is a very important piece. I think we'd all agree, and we welcome the submissions from all three of you and appreciate your testimony today very much, and wish you a very wonderful rest of your day and safe travels. So thank you very much. And colleagues, we will briefly suspend as we turn over. So now would be the time to take a good break, and we'll resume in-camera discussions. Thank you.